wonderful panelists about some of the specific projects that they are working on to integrate clinical and also patient-reported data to improve clinical care, as well as also creating data that meets a variety of stakeholder needs and goals. And with us, we have two fantastic, amazing thought leaders and experts in the field, and as well as two of my amazing team members and colleagues. So I would, in the interest of time, I would ask them to introduce themselves, please, and then we can start our discussion. And Vanessa, do you want to transition the slides? Thank you. So, Yssa?
So are we introducing? Okay.
Yes.
My name is Yssa DeWoody, and I'm a parent of a daughter with Ring 14 syndrome, and we're one of the patient advocacy organizations that works with RareX.
I'm Scott Demarest. I'm a pediatric neurologist and epileptologist at Children's Hospital Colorado and run a multidisciplinary clinic that RareX is our data platform for clinical data that we collect as part of the clinic.
I'm Kelly Wentworth. I'm the Associate Manager of Research at RareX.
I'm Vanessa Vogel. I am the Senior Director of Data Analytics and Data Governance for RareX, and also one of the founding members of RareX. Now we're going to slow down.
Well, I really get to present the best slide in this panel because this really represents the motivation behind everything that we do. So we can't talk about RareX, we can't talk about clinical care without talking about the children and the loved ones that we're trying to help. So my daughter is on, I guess, your left with Ring 14 syndrome, and then Brendan from Duke 15 Alliance, Karina, who is Bina Shah's daughter, is there from Project 8P. And then also, if you guys don't know, Charlene didn't kind of highlight her beautiful daughter, but there is Juno, and so we're happy to have her on this panel as well. And so when we look at these groups, they're all neurodevelopmental disorders, and they have really a lot of commonalities. And so we want to leverage that. And so the leaders of this organizations, they really got together and said, how can we have clinical care walk alongside research? And so a clinic was built out of this, and I have to give a lot of credit to Bina here. She's not on the stage with us, but she was indeed a driving force behind getting this clinic together. So I wanted to mention that. And so the idea here is this multidisciplinary neurogenetic clinic that Scott's going to tell you about in just a second. But really the goal was to provide world-class expertise and multidisciplinary care to patients through a personalized care plan, and then give them the opportunity to also do research and get to participate in research. So we've talked a lot about giving back to the families, and that's a good initiator. Guys, there's nothing better and more consistent with that idea of giving back to the families immediately than providing good clinical care. And with that, I'll pass it off to Scott.
So this is just to give a little bit of background about what that clinic looks like. I'm not going to read the names of all the specialists, but you can see it's a pretty big team that all sees the patients over a 2-day period, day-and-a-half period. Includes neurology, general pediatrics that really coordinates the whole thing. We have a nurse coordinator, rehab, PT, OT, speech, behavioral medicine, genetics, genetic counselors, etc. So this whole team sees the patients and really try to give a high quality overview of all the issues that might be going on for that individual, and give recommendations to that family that they can take home with them, whether they're local or whether they're coming to us from someplace more geographically distant. We don't take over care from their primary team. We're there to help support and collaborate with their primary team. And this is what we are trying to provide, as Yssa was saying, to the families. I had the experience of working with other groups that were primarily a research-driven protocol, where families were invited to come from all across the country to a center and fill out surveys and do tests for hours and hours, and they were never told anything about what to do with their kid. They were never given any clinical advice or direction, and they found that very frustrating and then didn't want to come back. And after I had heard that advice from other people, and we had sort of set up in other clinics an alternative model where it really is clinical first, that's what families get out of it. And the community then also can have the opportunity to collect research alongside that. And so everybody gets a win. So how does that work? We need to have really strong clinic coordination in order to be able to meet the needs of the patient from a clinical perspective, but also meet the research needs. We structure this within our clinical settings by not just sort of asking whatever it is comes up in the clinic visit. We have a highly structured clinical template and protocol so that we ask about all the things that we tend to see in that disorder or similar disorders. And we actually find that that makes our clinical care better also, because when you ask highly structured things that families didn't even intend to ask about or hadn't thought to say, hey, what about this? They come up, and then you can address those issues as well. So it's more comprehensive, but because it is also highly standardized, it means that the data you're collecting for research purposes is also higher quality. So it supports both sides of it. And a couple of notes here towards the bottom are just that this doesn't have to be perfect when you get going. Like, just you get started, you make your best guess at what's going to make sense for that organization, for that group of individuals, for your institution, and you can make it better over time. You can continue to iterate on your protocols, on your data collection that you have involved. As you learn more collectively, both family advocacy groups, RareX, us, as you learn more about what are the needs of that group of patients, then you can do better about how you're collecting that and meeting those needs. And this last point, I think, is often something that tends to be overlooked a little bit, which is sort of getting the data together, and the agreements to share data with various people is a bureaucratic nightmare, just being honest. I'm at a big academic bureaucracy. I've done it. I've set up massive clinical networks with, at this point, NIH funding and those sorts of things. It takes a long time, a lot of agreements in place. There's a lot of busy work before you actually get to do any science or any data collection. So one of the things we tried to do right from the start is say, one, I don't really want to have to be the one who does that. I don't want to have to maintain all of those regulatory infrastructures to be able to support these groups. So I wanted to offload that to someone else, a third party, in this case RareX, that could maintain all of that data collection platform, and I could focus on providing good clinical care and what's the right data for us to be collecting from a research standpoint. This is a really busy slide and might be kind of small in some of the boxes, but you don't have to worry about sort of the details here. This is to show an example of kind of what are we aiming for? What is the payoff for this? This is data collected from that NIH-supported research network for CDKL5 deficiency disorder that I help run. And the concept here is that we had more than 150 patients that all contributed data for this disorder, from clinical data, from parent report outcome measures, and in this case, we also had some biomarkers and things like that. But the vast majority of this was survey-based or done in clinic. And we had multiple surveys that sometimes spoke to the same domain. And so we actually could create one total model of what does severity of a disease look like from combining these multiple sources of data, both clinical and parent, which were better in aggregate than any one measure by itself in terms of representing the whole of an individual within that community. We were able to then correlate that severity overall, the big blue circle, with other things that are important like quality of life or with our biomarkers that we were utilizing. And we actually had a really cohesive, beautiful model for being able to do this. Why does that matter? One, it tells you the relative weight of different types of issues within that community that contribute to their overall severity and to their quality of life. And it also helps to guide things like, if ready for a clinical trial, what outcome measures should we be thinking about? Not that this overall severity score would necessarily become the primary outcome measure within a clinical trial, but you can actually back calculate from this any one measure that's utilized, what is its relative contribution to the overall severity score? And so how important is it as maybe being a primary versus secondary outcome measure or being useful within a clinical trial setting? So it's a very data-driven way of trying to comprehensively understand what is driving quality of life and severity within a population. And it's much, much better if you can do that from both a parent's perspective and a clinician's perspective combined.
So kind of how does this come together, right? So we talked a little bit about we've talked about clinical care, we've talked about clinical outcomes already. Lots of the groups before have talked about how data has been driving a lot of their clinical trials and that sort of thing. But where does RareX kind of come into this? We were totally remiss at the beginning of today to even explain what RareX was. So I'm going to talk a little bit, I'm going to back it up just a little bit for those of you in the room who've never been to a presentation of what RareX does and what it brings together, that this project that we're talking about really is kicking the tires of this idea that that RareX was. So RareX is a raw data platform where we're able to collect data and we're able to connect data. And that comes from the massive need in the rare space that all of these groups are being stood up, or there's N of 1 trials, or there's N of 1 groups that are coming up, that they're told to do research, they're told to collect data, they're told to find patients, but they're not told how to do it. They don't know how to get there, they don't know where to put it, and on top of it, it costs a lot of money. So RareX came forward as basically a disease-agnostic platform to say, you can stand up under a shared governance structure to collect research-grade data in a structured and ontologied manner, that through clinical outcomes assessments brought forward by our subject matter experts, as well as HPO terms and that sort of thing, say, I'm collecting data that might not be specific to my disorder, but is going to get me a fair amount of the way where this is what the symptomology of this disorder looks like. Start with the characterization, and then with collaborating with researchers who know a little bit more about it, or maybe clinicians who are seeing more patients, to add in additional data sets that are needed to kind of refine that whole data structure around that characterization. So we bring forward this raw data platform. For this group, we really said, let's talk about the patient-reported outcomes. Patients can identify themselves saying, hey, my kid has CDKL5, right? In one of Scott's cases. I'm going to give some data about them as a parent, right? I know my kid, I'm going to give some survey data on there. Then, on top of it, we know that these clinicians are collecting then that next detailed data that as a point of care, they're talking a little bit more about what the medical needs are, what the medications are, response to medications, all of those things that parents might not be able to answer, put research data into. So then we have to put those two things together. So for this data set, we've got the patient-reported data coming in through RareX. We've got the clinical data coming in through the clinical data platform. Additionally, in this one, we're not going to talk too much about it. We also have biosamples. We collect data. We also get whole genome and whole exome sequencing on them to add into that data structure. And then on top of it, we have additional data sets that are coming in from different places, right? We've got the clinical care ones, but we also have ones that may be coming from the community. There might be another patient advocacy group that has a registry that's sitting there. But we need to bring it together, to have a look at it, really kind of come up with a nice data model, and then to be able to evaluate what we're collecting, what the purpose is, and then how we can really create different outcomes and different endpoints in these spaces. So that's kind of what RareX brings together, and I'm sorry that was really quick, and we should have done it at the beginning, but that's kind of what it is. All right, so in this case, how do we make the patient-reported data improve clinical care, right? So Scott, for many, many years, has been having these clinics, but at the end of the day, like he said, bringing these patients in to do natural history study collection, it doesn't really always get at their clinical needs. And they're left kind of, really tired. Kids are usually not super compliant by the end. And on top of it, if you send them home with surveys, they're not always giving them back, to be honest. It's one of those things that's when you come down to the coordination of this research data, once the patients leave, it's like, you might not see anything more. So you hopefully you caught everything there. But like we said for RareX patients, let's flip it on its head. What information are we collecting in RareX can we get before they're seen? because we coordinate a lot. Kelly's going to tell you a little bit about that. Coordinate a lot. We know who's coming into clinic. We can say, okay, reach out to the families. You're going into clinic in 2 weeks. Please go into RareX and fill out these patient-reported outcomes or fill out these validated surveys, because then we can hand it over to the team and they can look at it, right? You want to have all that information so that when they come in at that point of care, you're not spending a whole lot of time on that background. You're not spending a whole lot of time just reviewing things that are kind of, already wrote. They can read it beforehand, and then they can really structure that visit around there. Additionally, collecting any more detailed information that the patient-reported outcomes aren't capturing, right? So we integrate those data sets. You can see on the left here, these are the clinically relevant measures that we met with the clinicians who see them to say, what would you want to see? So these are all the ones that we pull from the patient record before they're seen at the clinic, and then it's handed over to them in this. This is Tara's coming up later, so that's the next part after this is data access. So we post it to a shared workspace. It's all password protected and that sort of thing, that they can then pull those data sets down and review them prior to being seen. Okay. You want to talk about? Let me see. All right.
So right here, we have two graphs next to each other, and we have our Ring 14 data right next to our KDM5C data. We chose KDM5C because they're actually a fairly active community on our platform, and we wanted to give a pretty accurate representation of what some of the benefits are of having this integration with our clinical team. I think there are a few surveys here that would be great to highlight. There's overall participation. We have awesome participation from these families, especially in the lead up to them visiting the clinic. And a lot of that motivation comes from knowing that that data can be sent to their clinical team and then be involved in their child's clinical care. It's a really real-time, accessible way for them to feel that the research is helping their child. One measure, so specifically, a lot of the time, the clinical team will have measures they ask me to say, like, when I'm reaching out, also, these are the measures that we want the most done. We had that huge list on the slide before. That's everything we send over. And some people do all those things. For some people, they're not able to do that many surveys, or they're just newly registering for the first time. And when that's happening, we're really trying to give them a priority list. On that priority list is one survey that, this text is really small, so I doubt you can see it, but the CSHQ, I believe in this community, is about at 72%. I choose that survey as an example because right now it's given to pretty much every non-enabled patient, meaning a patient who's not consenting for themselves on our platform.
Tell them what that is.
So that means oh, sorry, it's the Children's Sleep Habits Questionnaire. I spend all day talking about surveys. It's become a second language. We have a 72%, I believe, completion rate in our Ring 14 community. And that is one of the measures that when I reach out, I say, hey, this is used a lot clinically. If you have time, please do it. Versus our very active KDM5C community, I believe we have around a 40%. It's been a huge change in like those surveys specifically, but even over the board, we have had really awesome completion, really awesome response, and parents really like the option to be able to do this. So with this collaboration, we also have opened up the possibility of doing clinical data collection at events. This has come with some really awesome benefits. There's also some drawbacks to this, which I think some people don't always realize going into things like this. For the pros of this, we have the fact that for a lot of rare diseases like this, you will never get a population together that large. You are able to collect data on a population that you would never be able to reach in that amount of time in clinic. In clinic, it would take years. At a family conference, you have 10 families with an ultra-rare disease in the same room. We also have the opportunity for caregivers to hear about the research that's being done, for them to hear about what's going on with the clinical teams. Specifically at our Ring 14 conference this summer, the clinical team was able to present how some of the data is being used, and that was really awesome for parents to be able to see, and they were able to build those relationships with the clinicians, with the researchers that are working on their diseases. On the con side, we do have the fact that, one, being seen at a conference is not a clinical visit, meaning the clinicians working there cannot give clinical advice. They cannot give clinical guidance. I'm sure it's the bane of their existence. That being said, we try really hard to make all data available, meaning that any data collected at our conferences, we are able to then share back with your care team. So even if clinical guidance cannot be given, that data can still go to your own clinicians who can then guide you on anything needed there. And it's that brings us to the second point, that this kind of collaboration completely depends on having clinicians who are willing to do this. And we've been really lucky to work with the CHCO team. They've been really flexible, they've been very available, but it is a huge commitment from any team. And it really requires cooperation to make it happen. So as mentioned, we had an event, a Ring 14 conference in 2023, hosted by Ring 14 USA. There were 10 families in attendance. Before anyone came to the conference, a form was sent out asking, are you interested in giving biosamples at the time we were collecting for the other project? And are you interested in clinical research and doing clinical assessments? For the biosamples, we had 6 families say yes, but that has a huge asterisk next to it where of those 6 families, only 3 had actually signed a consent form. And of those 6 families, at least 2 or 3 of them had said yes, but only for our child. Of those families, 5 said yes to clinical assessments. 1 family said maybe. After the presentation from the Colorado Children's team, this completely turned around. Interest skyrocketed because they were able to see how that data is being used, how it's important, and how they could help, how they could get their child involved in the numbers that they were seeing. We had 100% participation on both sides, biosamples and clinical assessments. We also had 100% completion of the Vineland, which, if any of you in this room have ever taken it before, it's a beast of a survey. We were able to use all that data, and with the biosamples, we not only had 100% participation, but we had 100% participation from at least 1 parent with every family. We had almost every eligible parent caregiver there give a blood sample, which is very, very unusual. So it just really shows the value of having this kind of collaboration, and it never would have happened without the help of all 3 groups working together.
All right. So this all sounds really good, right? Everybody wants it, right? But infrastructure is a 4-letter word. So we were able to collect this data. We're able to collect the biosamples. We're able to get the whole genome and whole exome. But what ends up happening is the infrastructure to support and maintain that, and also make it available back to researchers, clinicians, patient advocacy groups, is infrastructure that when Scott talks about creating it for CDKL5, and he talked to me about, he's like, I never want to do that again. So now you're going to do it. So we are. So through shared governance and expandability, we really did say we needed to make sure that the infrastructure we were putting together was foundational. So this data that's coming in, and at the end of the day too, it's not perfect yet. It's always iterative. We are always changing. We're always trying to improve it. But at the end of the day, we knew that it had to be something that was going to be expandable and be able to be not duplicative. And also, as groups are interested in doing this and joining these efforts and potentially getting funding for that, we can put it out there, right? So the data structure that's coming from these neurogenetics groups, we can take a look. What data is working? What data we're collecting is able to be used for all of these different stakeholders? And then when another group comes on, say, well, how much overlaps? Do we need to expand it? Do we need to remove it? Do we need to change it up a little bit to meet everybody's needs? So in terms of the expansion, it's dependent upon the standardization of the infrastructure. So we put something together that really does take all of this data collection that we're talking about. We're ingesting that data back from Illumina for the whole genome. And then on top of it, we need people like you in the room who are researchers, who are advocates, who are working with researchers, or advocates who are doing their own analysis to come in and query this data. The purpose of RareX is to help collect data, help structure data, help standardize data, and put it together. But then we need people like you to use it effectively, to say we're meeting the mark and give us feedback, okay? Talk about CDKL5? Okay. Sorry, we're in a little bit of a time crunch, so. All right, and so I actually covered this a little bit, that we take a platform approach to this. Really, we wanna make sure that we're creating something, we're putting something together, that the outcome, it reduces variability in our data. It increases data completeness. It standardizes the protocol and for quality control, and it also standardizes the logistics and the sample collection. When Scott says to set up this administration and this bureaucracy, one clinic takes anywhere between 6 and 9 months just to sign the paperwork, to even talk about data and to talk about exchanging data and where it's going to go. So when it comes down to these things, we are ready, willing, and able to be fantastic partners in this, and we are really making sure that when we put together this infrastructure, that we're able to say, here's the example, new clinic. We are working on a couple of them. I'm not going to mention names just in case it's not necessarily fully public yet, but it worked here. Will it work for your organization? Can we make changes? Will this work the same way? And what do we need to do to make sure we're sharing all that governance? Additionally, it's one of the notes is that this is all patient-led. We're not doing this just, Rare X and Global Genes and Children's Hospital of Colorado. Without Yssa and Bina and a couple of the other groups that we're working with, they're the ones really driving this forward. They're the ones, we hold meetings once a month to look at patient flow, what's happening with their data, who has access to it, who's requesting it. Bina is a great example of, she's putting the data out there. She's like, I got all these researchers, they're going to be requesting all this data, they're requesting the biosamples, and it's our job to make sure the infrastructure they're bringing forward is able to make that happen. So they're really the ones saying that they're pushing us. Sometimes, no, I'm just kidding. Sometimes she wants to push us off a cliff, but no, just me. But we need that voice to say, like, this is what we need. And on top of it, the researchers are accessing it. Emily said this earlier. When you access it, are we meeting your needs, or do we need to change it up to make sure that it's meeting your goals, what you're accessing it for? All right, obstacles or opportunities. So at the beginning, when you're talking about these things, and when we brought this forward, is determine what's important to all your stakeholders, right? We talk about N of ones, we talk about larger groups, but who are your stakeholders, and then how do you prioritize what they want? Because in my experience and everybody else's experience in rare disease, when do you want it? Yesterday. No, not now, yesterday. So how do you prioritize all those things that you wanted yesterday and determine what's important to those stakeholders and how to prioritize that? Because you want to make sure that you're getting your minimal viable product to be foundational. Also, bidirectional sharing. We do this a lot through, I think our consent for sharing was mentioned earlier in one of the groups. Like, it's sometimes hard to understand, but bidirectional sharing of data similar to our structure right now is imperative for one of our stakeholders, right? The patients. If we don't have bidirectional sharing, if I'm not sharing the research data with Scott and Scott's not sharing his clinical data back to us, you're doing the disservice to that patient who's sitting there giving it on both sides. That's just not fair. So making sure that the contracting and all of the institutional support you have has that bidirectional sharing under compliance and governance and all the other things, but make sure that it's there. Also, data management to facilitate the usage of the data, and that's where advocacy researchers and clinicians who know it's available, that's where it is. Facilitating, like, you need to get it out there, we need to manage the data in a way that can get it to you as fast as possible for your needs. The other thing is technology builds in solutions. A lot of these things is, you think if you build it, they will come. At the end of the day, we found out that's not actually right. That's not really what it is. Let's think of an idea, pilot some solutions, make it flexible, make it be able to actually change with insights, and then make it grow. Pick it again. Is that still going to work? Do I need some different insights? Do I need some more flexibility? Do I need some more movability in that space? And so we've really been in that space that we adopt a technology solution, pilot it a little bit, but have the space to be able to grow and change to facilitate the stakeholders' needs. And then back to this completeness of data and quality of data. We've all heard, especially the researchers in the room, garbage in, garbage out, right? So we want to make sure the data we're collecting, things we're putting onto the space, the surveys, the clinical outcomes assessments, and all of those other things are meeting the needs of people who are requesting the data and using it for whatever reason, and that data is complete and that data is clean. Also, there's a bunch of other obstacles, but these are the big ones. Then, funding is the other four-letter word. In general, we know that rare disease is underfunded, right? And that's why Demarest took a nonprofit approach in all of this, because we want to make sure that we're able to partner effectively in different areas. But right now, our current funding options in these areas are foundational support programs, like Ring 14, 8P, and all of the other ones in the room that are on this. Governmental funding, which is really hard to get sometimes, and independent donors industry. And in this case, the commission was one of the big funders. We had gotten a grant from the CZI, Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, to fund a lot of this. But I want to be very, very clear. What we present here and what we've grown, we did it with pittance. And we did it because people in this room donated their time, talent, and treasure, and we would have never been able to do it with the money we had. And so at the end of the day, making sure when you're bringing something forward and you're bringing your research idea forward or you're bringing data or usage forward, it's integral to the process to determine future sustainability of any large project, especially with those that are data-driven. Because what Dr. Demarest has built at Children's Colorado isn't sustainable with lots of ideas around funding. And I think that I'd make this joke, but we all get together and then we nerd out. And like last night we had dinner and the only thing we talked about, and I'm not actually kidding, was funding ideas. I mean, and we're friends and stuff, but we talked about funding ideas. And so it's one of those things that you want to get the data that you create needs to create funding opportunities. Oh. Did I miss? Oh.
This is. Oh, okay. I didn't know that. So glad we have such a wonderful panelists coach me and tell me what to do. So, which is great. And but we have 3 minutes, and here you can see list of some questions that we would love to get input and perspective from our wonderful panelists. So, and we have, I look at the clock, we have 3 minutes. So if any one of you would like to say anything about those questions listed there, I'm going to save time, then please share your thoughts, and then we can open it up to the audience.
Okay, I'll kick this off and leave everybody a minute, maybe. So, guys, when you're identifying these key KOLs, I will say it's important to find like-minded people. It really helped to start this clinic with Scott, who had experience running other clinics for other organizations. So that was really key. And then the other one that I might say something about is the how important it is to return back to the ecosystem. The reason that this model, and so honored to have Ring 14's completion rate kind of highlighted on this, but the reason it is because there was immediate feedback to the families in clinical care. There were actual incentives before. So what they didn't mention is that the people who participated in the clinic, all of these people are planning, who participated at research at the conference, are now scheduling to go to the clinic. And so meeting the team and building that trust is really key. And guys, this just takes longer than you think. I mean, I wish I could say that it was all quick. I wish I could say that this was all, cheap. But it wasn't. It cost real money from our organizations. So even though RareX is a nonprofit, to fund special projects like this, it takes real money. And so I just want to emphasize this isn't on the plate for everybody. It's a sub study that happened, and it takes time and money. The second one. Well, guys, I think the natural way that you pitch this to your community is the fact that you want clinical care to walk hand in hand with research. Guys, we all want cures, we all want therapies, but the fact of the matter is this takes time. So what are we doing for the families right now? How are we improving their quality of life right now? How are we extending their lives right now? And so when you put research in terms of clinical care and in terms of quality of life right now, that's really motivating to families. And so I think that you have to sell that component.
I'll make one quick comment that I think is a piece that hasn't been significantly touched on, and that is the collaboration between Dina and Vanessa in bringing this together, and then they brought on 2 additional organizations as well that were part of the clinic. And it's a testament to the impact that you can have through collaboration as rare diseases. There's often a feeling of like, I got to take care of my organization, my families, but there really is a lot in common. And some of those things can be difficult to move because there is real dollars behind it, because there is real infrastructure. If I have to set up a separate agreement and a separate infrastructure with separate data sharing for every rare disease, as a clinician, that is an overwhelming task. It's never going to be scalable. It's never going to be sustainable. Being able to do that in a way that is on a broad platform that meets the needs of multiple communities within a single project really helps to be able to make rare disease more manageable in all of the real operational ways to be able to move things forward for all of those disorders. So they were willing to actually like make all of that happen and then just dragged me along with them, and deserve a huge amount of credit for being willing to think collaboratively about it.
If I may, I would like to, because in the interest of time, just say one thing. I had a bunch of other questions. I try to skip that, but I think I wanted to echo what Scott and Yssa said, but also I wanted to add that also kudos to, of course, all of you, to our advocates, patient advocates, and specifically, I think another element that we didn't highlight, but I would love to highlight, is that kudos to clinician scientists such as Scott for putting a lot of effort, because he was humble, not talking about that himself, but I think I owe it to him and leaders like him to recognize the enormous amount of effort and time that someone like him put, and also many others in the audience, that to make it happen, because again, they are overwhelmed, they are so busy, and they have little bit time at the clinic, but the fact of matter to come outside of their busy clinic and have the willingness to listen to patients and find ways to incorporate those needs into collaborative efforts like what we talk about, I think it's amazing, and it's a blessing to all of us. So thank you so much to all of our wonderful panelists, and looking forward to continue this great conversation with you and for the rest of the conference. Thank you.
I do want to mention this real quick. So what we've implemented here, this all started with the Commission on Complex Copy Number Variants. I said we had the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative grant. And to create all of this infrastructure, we had working groups, similar to what Carmen had talked about for the expert working groups. We had different working groups to create all of these pieces of data collection. And we published it. We published our approach in the American Journal of Human Genetics with, again, those people that we had almost 100 key opinion leaders who gave their time, talent, and treasure to put this together and just to establish this roadmap. And we're just getting to go. We're just on the little highway, just kind of trucking along on this roadmap to see if it's going to work and to see if the data that we're collecting and putting together, and that our goal is actually going to come to fruition as to what we thought was going to come to pass. So just wanted to put it out there. This is one of the biggest things. Like all the things that we're doing, we want to make it public. We want to make our time and our efforts in this space as accessible as we possibly could. So
we actually don't have time for questions.
Do we
We're going
have
to go
time?
right into Vanessa and Zohreh.
you can do. I can finish it, and I can finish the access
Okay.
piece. So we can do questions if anybody has one.
Okay, great.
This all sounds so amazing and awesome. How do you translate it to other locations and also to serve patients who are in underserved communities?
I will say that one of the things that we're doing, that's a huge question, first of all, but one of the ways that Ring 14 is trying to make this accessible to underserved is that as far as getting the patients to clinic, we provide travel scholarships. So a family can can apply very easy application and get up to $1,000 so that they can actually make it to clinic. And I think the other organizations that are a part of the clinic also have similar ways of handling it. But to your point, wow, I would like to see a network of these clinical, neurogenetic, multidisciplinary clinics all across the country, not just at Scott. And so one of the things that in another area that we're doing is publishing a paper on the importance of multidisciplinary and multisystemic care for really profoundly impacted patients. And so hopefully if we raise the awareness of that need and the patient perspective on that, perhaps that begins to spawn new clinics all over the place, because we know that geographically this is truly limiting. And so from a patient advocacy perspective, that's one of the things that we're trying to push.
I would add sort of 2 points to that. In current state, it's not fair that you all have to bear some burden on trying to access high quality care. But it is also the reality of the current circumstance. If you want more clinics, make it as easy on those institutions and on whatever clinical champion you have there to set it up. We have a model for how to do that. It's going to look different at every organization. So you have to have some flexibility. We have a whole bunch of people who all see patients on the same day. Other places have a model where you maybe see 1 or 2 in one day and you see other ones at other times. And what's realistic at different institutions and the way that their workflows exist may be different. So that's okay as long as they can get access to a good team that's committed to I would say learning about that disease. They don't have to be an expert actually when they start. They just have to be willing to become an expert. Taking junior faculty under your wing and encouraging them to adopt your group of disorders is a good way to do that. And the last thing I would say is making a plug just for advocacy. Multidisciplinary clinics under current models of reimbursement lose money. So it's actually a drain on an institution to have a multidisciplinary clinic. And yet we have pretty good evidence that it is a highly successful model in terms of both research and clinical outcomes. We need to go and bang on doors just south of here and get CMS to change the way that they fund these things. That's when you really get to it being scalable, is when you incentivize organizations to do this through funding rather than asking all of you to make up a difference on a shortfall that happens for an institution by trying to do the right thing.
The other one thing that I'm going to say is that RareX is brought forward because there's more similarities. Even if you're rare, you're not special, sort of thing. There's way more similarities that we can use economy of scale to bang on institutional doors. So when you're coming in and when you're identifying potential other collaborative groups in this space, if you're talking to somebody, hey, our kids seem similar, or our patients seem similar, really following those up and then saying, like, can we create a collaboration where I'm willing to give a little bit, I'm willing to take a little bit, I'm willing to kind of rethink my strategy so that we know that economy of scale, we can leverage that. Because when it happens that the institutions are going to listen to when the whole rare disease community, the whole NDD community comes and says, you have an NDD clinic, we want to have 20 groups see the same NDD clinic with the same structure versus let's set up 20 individual NDD clinics based upon diagnosis. And so the combination of making sure when you're going to these collaborations and really putting these things together to take that into account, that you have the strategy for your organization in mind, but just know that some of these areas, especially in medical care, there's power in numbers when it comes to those sorts of things. When you're talking about hospital administration, it's a lot easier to come to it with like RareX coming forward to their contracting versus every individual group saying, I want to have a data sharing agreement with you. I want to have a data sharing agreement with you. So just know that in the back of your mind, if you're interested in something like that, we can talk through kind of like, how do you make your strategy together? And then how do you keep, like the three of us, how do you keep adjusting it to make sure it meets everybody's needs? Because over the last 4 years, it's been a lot of adjustment.
Yeah, we can't see anything, so please
I know, that's what
just
she-
go for it.
That's what she just said. I just assumed Vanessa was trying to ignore me. It's Rachel, by the way.
I can't see you, but hi, Rachel.
Actually, you kind of answered my question a little bit. As the hired brain and time for the Med13L Foundation, one of the things that we're working on is natural history in a multiple NDD clinic. And, you know, the data sharing piece has obviously come up. And so institutionally, this question is probably for Scott and Vanessa. How did you convince Children's to let go of that data to be managed in a third-party venue without creating your own internal infrastructure? And
We took a phased approach to it. We didn't say on day one, all of the data goes directly into RareX. There's actually still a bit of a pass-through for our organization where we pull some of that together in our own internal database and then share it. You have to get the data use agreements. You have to make sure that your IRB that you're consenting families into is consistent with what you're going to do with that data. That all took time to put in place. And so having a phased approach means you can get started on it and you can continue to evolve it as you need to go along. You just have to start and plug away at it.
Hi, oh, wait, is this working? Oh, hi. I have a question, I think both for Scott and just for RareX in general. So, Scott, you work at Children's, Colorado. So I think a lot of these specialty clinics are in children's organizations, right? So you're getting a lot of great data from younger families. What happens to that data and how do we keep that momentum moving forward into the adult space? And how does RareX then collaborate with parent organizations or not another, like, you know, other organizations to say there might be a knowledge gap or a gap here that we've identified from our data, because we've got all kids data from 18 and under. How does RareX then come to you and say, how do we help cultivate the new experts for the adult population? How does that work in RareX and in Children's Colorado?
So that was maybe like 5 questions. But I'll do my best to like hit some of the main points. This is going to be different for different children's hospitals. For ours, when we have a specialty clinic that offers some level of care that is not already offered in the adult world, then we don't have an age limit associated with it. So for our clinic, we do see adults. We've seen adults in their 50s with some of these disorders. That doesn't mean we take over all of their care. They're still an adult. They still need adult providers who take care of, you know, like I don't do blood pressure stuff, you know, like that's an adult thing. And just because you have a rare disease doesn't mean you don't also have all the common things that happen to all of us as we get older. And so we would see them still have the opportunity to collect some of that data and then coordinate with their adult teams around how that fits into their overall care model. Not every children's hospital will allow that. I think those are institution-dependent policies. I think there's a separate question of how do we build additional adult expertise. I wish I could say that that was an easy thing. What I can say is there are movements, there's people who are trying to do this. The diagnostic efforts have often started in the pediatric population when it comes to genetic diseases, but increasingly they are getting older and aging out of pediatric institutions, and our adult colleagues are saying, wow, all these patients are coming to us with diagnoses in hand, even if they're not sending a whole lot of testing themselves. And so it's delayed compared to the pediatric world, but I think it is happening, and they're going to have to get on board more and more. There's ways in which we can try to be more constructive about that and think about what those collaborations look like. And some institutions are starting that. Toronto comes to mind, and Danielle Andrada.
I just want to emphasize that this is the nature of this clinic. It doesn't serve as a medical home clinic except for the people who live in, you know, Colorado and around that area. So the plan is that it consults, and it actually gives you a very comprehensive care plan, and that our adults who have been to clinic, one of the things that they really appreciate is that they bring that back to their adult care who have no idea how to handle these adults. And so it just starts as a starting off place of how to initiate that care. In other words, it really does aid in transition, which is really important.
And then the RareX platform is age agnostic. And so I would also say that while even if you can't be seen in a clinic, because the clinic is a pediatric only clinic, you can still do data collection for parent report outcomes within the adult portion.
So we structured our data platform that when you're coming on, you're able to consent for an adult who's a legal authorized representative, somebody who's going through that whole process. It's age agnostic. You're able to come on, but it does denote when you're saying, I have an adult child who is able to consent or assent for themselves. You make that determination. I have the legally authorized representative paperwork, all that other stuff. But what it does is it helps us to determine, is your person able to answer questions for themselves, or we put it into the proxy format? So most of the surveys that we put on there, it's either self-report, meaning I'm a patient, I'm enrolling, I'm participating on myself, or we have a proxy version where it anticipates that person is not a child, but it's a person who can't answer on behalf of themselves. So a caregiver or a care partner is able to answer on their behalf. They're able to participate in research in that way. The clinical aspect is way more complex. It's something that not outside of RareX, Yssa and I are part of the Rare Epilepsy Network, and we talk often in terms of these transition of care from pediatric into adulthood in this space. Toronto's a great example of this. They do a fantastic job for epilepsy patients, but it's back to advocacy. It's we need to knock on a lot more doors in terms of what transition of care looks like for these patients that have needs. They're no longer children. They have blood pressure problems. They have all the other things that come along with just aging. But what does that look like best case scenario? But for the RareX platform, we are agnostic to age. We do, in the branching logic that we put things, when we put different surveys and different clinical outcomes onto the platform, we take into account sometimes through lots and lots of discussion and examples and taking from the communities that we're hearing, how to do that best, to be able to capture that participant at their age with their cognitive level and everything else that's coming along with them in the best way possible. But again, we want people to access that data to tell us if we're hitting the mark, especially when we're talking about these ages. The other thing that RareX does is in this space, many of you probably have heard of the Citizen platform. Retrospective natural history out of medical records is something that people talk about a lot. There's a couple different companies that are doing that. Partnering with groups like that who are collecting and structuring data where it can come into the RareX ecosystem is another way that we're trying to break that nut, right? That they're doing it in these spaces where there's other data sets that we can bring together and hopefully use them most effectively in that area, because that's kind of where you're going into where late diagnostic in the adulthood. I got 3 kids. I don't remember what they did yesterday, much less what they looked like when they were 5. And so one of those things, we want to have different ways to get to that retrospective data for those adults too. So,
sorry. That I just wanted to again, one more time, thank our amazing panelists and all of you. Thank you so much. Thank you.